Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a discussion regarding our satellite water recycle facility and irrigation of the 2 golf courses here in Rossmoor. Today with me, I have Jim Breezak with Bowman and Associates. He has been working on this project with Golden Rain Foundation for several years, starting with a feasibility study. And also from his team is Christy Robinson from the back there. And we have on the phone Dr. Dennis Casper, who will be available if we need. Today, we hope to provide you with some information on the current status of this project, some background on exactly what a SWRF is, what we call it, what that is, what it can do for Rossmoor, and why it's so important at this time. I think it's pretty appropriate that we have this meeting here today on a day when it's supposed to get close to 90 degrees, and it's only April, beginning of April. So we are definitely in the midst of some climate change. Welcome and come on in, folks. This is hopefully one of the first times we'll be able to address you on this topic, but there will be plenty of opportunity as we go through the various studies and aspects of this project that you will have to give input to the board of directors as well as to our consultant team. So again, this is the presentation, our first public outreach on what we call the SWRF Satellite Water Recycle Facility Project. Today we will be looking at the importance of the golf courses as green space here in Rossmoor. We'll talk about some of the current water issues that we're facing, introduce recycled water in California, what the current state of that is. We'll talk about plans for recycled water here at Rossmoor, and we'll also address some other conservation steps that we have taken and plan to take. So why this project now? The arid West is experiencing more frequent and more severe drought cycles. California legislative mandates call for expansion of recycled water systems and alternative water systems. Certainly we have uncertain water sources, and we'll talk about that more. East Bay Mud is projecting increases of up to 10% in the cost of potable water over the next 3 years, as well as potential surcharges during times of severe drought, which we are in. Rossmoor currently has no access to public recycled water supplies and potential future competition over wastewater, which is what provides the source for recycled water. So we're going to talk about the importance of maintaining the golf courses and open green space that it provides here in Rossmoor. Certainly, golf is a recreational amenity that many of you enjoy. This last year, in 2021, we had the highest rounds of golf we've had since 1995. 77,944 rounds of golf were played on the course. A lot of that was generated through the pandemic, as it was one of the only recreational amenities, but that interest has only continued to grow since I guess it hasn't ended yet, but since more programs have been allowed to reopen. So again, it supports the amenity of golf. It provides a scenic byway for the enjoyment of all residents. As you come in down Rossmoor Parkway or throughout the valley and you see that beautiful open green space, certainly it has a great value through the center of the heart of Rossmoor. It provides a critical fire break for the valley, provides a safe zone for evacuations, and as we'll discuss, it helps to maintain your property value. Not only if you live on the golf course with views, but just the fact that it is here and it is that beautiful green space enhances all the property values within Rossmore. So the golf course plays a critical role as a fire break. Plants that are low growing, open structure, and have less resin, such as turf, present a low fire risk. Provide large open areas with low fire fuel, creating defensible space as an effective fire break. Places more distance between fire and nearby structures. An open space provided by the golf courses has been used as staging area for equipment, personnel, and as fire command centers. A few examples of where golf courses near significant fire provided a break. As we talked, maintaining the golf course requires that we have irrigation supply. You can't have a golf course in that green space without water. Throughout California, there have been many golf courses that have closed during the past drought due to lack of access to water or not being able to deal with increase in potable water prices or dealing with restrictions on access to water. As golf courses go fallow, home prices certainly around those golf courses are impacted. We don't want this vision here in Rossmore. So currently the golf courses at Rossmore are irrigated through three main water sources. The first water source, the main water source, comes from Tice Creek. Golden Rain Foundation has riparian rights to Tice Creek, and throughout the year we utilize and divert water from Tice Creek into the pond and then use that for irrigation. A large source of water flowing into Tice Creek comes from the water-cooled air conditioning units that are on many of the manors here. Those units create condensate that then runs off towards the creek. During a hot summer month, we actually will have greater flow in the creek than we do right now due to air conditioning units running. Another source of water when we don't have enough coming from the creek is from potable water from East Bay Mud. So we will begin purchasing water sometime in April and go throughout the peak months. The later we can go in the season before purchasing water, the better. But that is our other main source. So Tice Creek is a source where we again have riparian rights, so we can divert water legally. However, during times of severe droughts, the state can mandate curtailment to those water sources. If they determine that there's not enough water to meet other demands from the creek or from that water source, they do have the ability to curtail those rights. As we mentioned too, condensate coming from the water-cooled air conditioning creates a great deal of the volume that is in Tice Creek. Those units are likely to be replaced over the next 5 to 10 years. So the condensate and the runoff that we recycle already from that may go away. So Tice Creek is a valuable source for us right now, but it is somewhat in jeopardy as we move into greater drought seasons. Our other source of East Bay Mud water, again, is potable water. It is subject to restrictions from East Bay Mud or mandatory restrictions from the state. We are currently in drought conditions at, I believe, our current classification is, as of April 5th, we are in a severe drought in Contra Costa. Other areas in California are already in what is classified as extreme drought conditions. Last year, at the beginning of September, Contra Costa was also in extreme drought, and that was just at the beginning of the rain season. So the fact that we are already in severe drought conditions at the end of the current rain season is not a good projection for moving forward. When you are under extreme drought conditions, things like water is inadequate for agriculture, wildlife, and urban needs. Fields are left fallow, orchards are removed. Fire season is very costly, and the number of fires and the season is extended. Many recreational activities, such as golf, are impacted. Fish rescue and relocation begins. Policies Policy change begins. Agriculture unemployment is high, and food chain supplies are interrupted. There's poor air quality because of greater greenhouse gas emissions. And water shortages are widespread. Surface water is depleted. Federal irrigation water supplies are extremely low. Junior water rights are curtailed, and water prices are extremely high. These are some of the things that we can expect as we move into that extreme drought condition later this year. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jim Brezak, who's going to start talking in regards to recycled water in California and get into specifics about our current project here in Rossmore.
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks to all of you for inviting us into your home this afternoon. We're proud to be here and to be a part of the project that's being analyzed. I want to tee up, as Jeff did, the recycled water use in California, just so we can get a little bit of perspective about who's using it and how much they're using it. On an annual basis, there's over 200 billion gallons per year of recycled water that's currently being used. It's being produced and used throughout the state. Of that 200 billion or so, almost 60% is being used for a combination of golf course, landscapes, and agriculture. So we know how to create recycled water acceptable to these end uses. And we know and are doing so throughout the state. We're meeting commercial, geothermal, seawater barrier, groundwater recharge, recreational impounds, wetland development, landscape irrigation, agricultural, and golf course. Golf course is still on the low end, maybe about 8% of the total volume dedicated to golf course use. We are increasing on an annual basis in the use of this really valuable resource. Across California, you can see the purple indicating as a heat map the concentration in Southern California, Imperial Irrigation Area, taking full advantage. But you can see also the stepwise fashion that we're increasing at 5-year, 10-year intervals is quite a bit, and it seems like it's not going away. We're relying upon it more and more integrated into our lives. As we use recycled water, we get another benefit. That is, the potable water that we're currently using can be suspended and given back to the agencies that distribute potable water, making that supply more sustainable, more readily available, while instead we use recycled water merely on the landscape. So it helps both camps out. What we do with recycled water helps us maintain our potable supply. I want to just mention briefly a review of recycled water. It's heavily regulated. It's regulated at the state level. It's regulated at the regional level. It's regulated at the federal level as well. California's Code of Regulations, CRC, regulates the development and use of recycled water through what's known as Title 22. And Title 22 mandates that recycled be used in a safe and effective way for non-potable reuse applications. I should amend this slide because there are committees at the state and regional level that are focused on indirect and direct potable reuse. That means going beyond the unrestricted use for irrigation purposes, but creating recycled water that can go eventually into the potable water system. It requires a much higher level of treatment than we're talking about here for the proposed project, but it is being done and it is being expanded. Public health is protected by the mandates and the requirements embedded in Title 22. An engineering report is required to be prepared, reviewed, approved, accepted before production can begin. Treatment standards have been set, and they're regulated by 9 regional boards. And here we're within the service area of the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. Now, we've heard this term quite a bit on SWRF. What is a SWRF? Quite simply, it's an acronym for Satellite Water Recycling Facility. It's used to produce safely recycled water for most irrigation demands that the golf course has. It's not a regional facility. We're not looking to take wastewater from outside of the community and bring it in, and we're not looking at producing recycled water and taking it anywhere except within this community. Additionally, there is a solid waste component that's produced as the effect of doing recycled water. That solid wastewater, goes back into the collection system as it currently does to Martinez at the Central Contra Costa Sanitary District's treatment plant. So a SWRF is small. A SWRF produces recycled in an on-site manner. Now, this is an example by Ovivo, just one of the many companies that manufactures these facilities commercially and makes them available for these types of projects for purchase. The satellite recycling facility looks at the membranes that are enclosed in the aeration chamber here as being the heartbeat of the facility. We got to this point where we're able to make such broad and large use of recycled water partly out of new technology. The technology that has gone into the discovery, the use, the optimization of these components, mostly the actual membrane itself, semi-permeable membrane, has really been the crowning achievement of the technology in manufacturing these systems. We've been able to, or the manufacturers have been able to shrink the size of the facility down, what's in the black box, because of these increases in technology. So the systems have become optimized, fitting in a smaller footprint, and they're available with the diversion that we take in to be able to create the recycled water at a quality that's acceptable with a purpose for an end use that's desirable. Now, I like these kinds of charts, and I think Dr. Casper, who's our associate on this project, is probably enjoying also looking at what we would normally call a jar test here. And on the far left corner, the raw sewage in the darkest is what we would expect at the point of diversion. So we would have a diversion structure with its own pump station, and that would be protected with its own set of screens. Raw wastewater would then be pumped to the treatment plant where it would undergo aeration and membrane separation. And then finally, recycled water is developed out of that, which includes disinfection, as well as the membrane filtration, the key component. Basically, the way these systems work is that we rely upon a series of microbiology that's inherent in our waste material. And we optimize pH, temperature, oxygen in order to give these commingled bugs the best environment to live in that they can. And those bugs are managed to be able to consume the phosphorus and the nitrogen and the biomass that's included within this system of treatment. The bugs are then filtered, removed, disinfected, and not threatening us anymore. Now, this slide we want to show the treatment process, which begins on the far left, where influent from the diversion system comes in, and it goes through a bar screen to remove materials that would otherwise negatively impact some of the equipment downstream. After the initial bar screening, we then go to a more narrow, a smaller pore screening, here shown as a disc screen. And then we go into the aeration chamber, which typically would have its membranes submerged within the air chamber itself. And that's shown in blue. So as we move across from yellow, the waste can be seen to be increased as a benefit or as a result of the aeration and the membrane filtration. Permeate pump is then used to pull off the good recycled water that we want to use. It goes through disinfection, and then it's ready as effluent. We have to still deal with the screenings that come off the treatment plant in 3 locations. This is the waste that goes back to central sand in this case, and it's not something that we want to treat further here, so we put it back into the sewer. Rossmore has devised its own solution for sustainability from a water resources perspective. The project provides alternative water supply for irrigation. It's not subject to the curtailment provisions that East Bay Mud has because we're talking about the use of our own water supply. Fire suppression results from monitoring and irrigation of our landscapes, and the site of the treatment plant, the SWRF, is proximal, close to the points of demand. We want to make those runs as short as possible because it takes pipeline to connect the system up. This is an overview, it's an aerial of what we've titled site number 6. It is near the Cactus Gardens. It's near, if you go through the security station on the way in to the community, it's off to your left. That road is an access road that is existing and paved road in order to get from the main road coming in to the site for the SWRF. I did also want to show that site number 5, located at the Creekside Complex, could also have some benefits in that there's similar activities of maintenance and large equipment that's already provided. There could be reconfigurable space. It could allow for more expansion. The potential could be used for some or all of the space that we see here. But basically, we're looking at rooftops both in yellow and blue. And we've looked at different configurations. It is possible with the small capacity that we're at to configure a facility within the fence line. So, studies that have already been completed along this line of thought. Water quality sampling has been done and analysis of that water to ensure that we're dealing with a water that can produce the product of a quality that's suitable for irrigation of the golf course. Additional flow monitoring has been done. That's been coordinated with Central Sand. Field environmental studies have been done for cultural resources. Mapping of the sites has been done. Geotechnical investigations are almost completed. So what needs to be done before we proceed to any kind of construction? It's a bit of a long road and it's going to take a while, but it provides intentionally several breakpoints at which the community could evaluate and reconsider the project. So updating of the cost estimate is the first thing. This is something that we believe should be an ongoing activity because of the importance to the overall acceptability of the project. CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA mandates a certain amount of investigation of impacts to different resources. The studies that will be completed are refinement of the conceptual design, which formulates the project description. We think that'll take about 2 to 3 months. Finalizing and making final and circulating that document, about 6 months. That's a deliberate process of ensuring that there's been adequate review by lead agency and other agencies that have responsibility over portions of the project. But most importantly, this community. There's a set of what are known as bridging documents that need to be developed, and the intention there is to use the methodology of what's called design build, hiring under one contract both the designer and the construction contractor to do so in a way that reduces risk and reduces finger pointing between those two entities as well. That's about a 7-month process. And then finally, the design build team is identified, selected through a competitive process. That's about a 9-month process. Now, the thing that I didn't mention in these slides, but something that we should keep in mind is water conservation. Whatever we could do to conserve water, our use of water within the community is vitally important. It helps us because we can lower the volume and therefore the cost of the facility that we're talking about. And Jeff is going to speak to us, starting off with a little bit more on water conservation efforts.
As you can imagine, this is a project that involves a great deal of coordination and approval process with outside agencies, including the City of Walnut Creek, Central Sanitation District, and East Bay Municipal Water District. We are working with those agencies to develop a memorandum of understanding to make sure that we all work towards the same end goal of conserving water and producing a new resource for us. So the development of a SWRF is certainly, as Jim just mentioned, a long-term goal, as there are many steps involved, and we've already been doing a lot, and there continues to be a lot to do. In the meantime, we certainly are looking for as many ways to conserve water as possible on the golf course. This map, and there's also another one of these in the back, shows some of the area that's in yellow that has been taken out of irrigated green space and converted to either wood chips or other non-irrigated sources. I believe it's about 20 acres thus far. There is ability and plans over the next 5 years to try and identify an additional 5 to 10 acres that can be eliminated. That saves a significant amount of water. We have also worked over the past many years to make sure and secure our water rights through the state of California and the riparian rights so we can safely divert water for the irrigation purposes. We capture as much water as we can already through all of the runoff that is experienced from both the water-cooled air conditionings, but any other source, and try and divert those so we can use those for irrigation. We use a highly technical and not sure the right term for it, Blake, but our irrigation system is such that it does not waste water. We are below the evaporated transmission on our use of water, so we try and put down as little as possible. And we will continue to look for ways to conserve water. All of this helps us as we develop the SWRF to be able to build a SWRF that is as small as possible and relies on as little wastewater as possible. So at this point, we're ready for some questions. So again, if you have those, if you want to pass them to Christy, if you want to use, she'll come around and grab some. Christy, if you want to use this mic right here, you can read them.
Okay. If the water is removed from the sewage, is there still enough liquid for the sewage to flow to central sand?
The quick answer to that is yes. Timing and release of the WAS, the water that's the waste product, which is a couple of percentage of the total volume. One of the ways of dealing with that is to make that discharge in the evening when there isn't a whole lot of other wastewater within the collection system. But we are specifically looking at that and the requirements from Central San. Central San is rightly concerned about the potential for increasing what is known as sedimentation within the pipe. And their concern extends to what may need flushing. And they do flushing as a routine maintenance operation now, a couple of times a year perhaps. 1 to 2 is what we've heard from them for this area. So you want to make sure that there is an adequate wastewater residual so that you could meet the hydraulic requirements of the system, so it's unencumbered as it flows into the collection system.
Okay. Has the extension of purple pipe from Central Sand been considered? Is there a cost advantage?
There was a project, Bob, we were talking about earlier called the La Marinda project, where a couple of the entities spearheaded by Central Sand had looked at an abandoned shell oil pipeline as a way of moving wastewater from Martinez to La Marinda. Ultimately, that project was rejected. It was, as I recall, quite expensive, limited by the existing infrastructure. There still are other efforts that Central Sand is looking into, rightly so, because they have a responsibility for wastewater collection throughout the region. So I'm sure they will continue to participate with us in the project, but to be more focused on that one requirement, and we'll work out details with them.
Just to add, Central Sand is engaged in a study currently about that very line to revive it. We are monitoring their study, and they are aware of our interest. Right now, those are long-term studies that they're engaged in, but we will certainly follow along with their progress.
Will it smell?
This is wastewater, and the quick and dirty answer is yes, it will smell. The question is, how do you mitigate for that? How do you avoid that? We have, as a part of the environmental studies, we have resource specialists who are PhD holder in their related fields for oil, odor, noise, and vibration. So we've done this before with other facilities, other treatment plants, other satellite plants, and applied engineering solutions to contain. There's ways of, well, you know what? I should just ask Dr. Casper, who's on the phone. He's our process engineer. Dennis, is there anything that you might want to add into the question, answering the question, will it smell?
The question needs to be clarified a little bit. Around the plant, there will be odor control measures to prevent the odors from leaving the site. Wastewater smells, we recognize that, and the systems are designed to contain those odors and remove them from any air that's discharged. Jim, maybe you can describe the system over, is it Anaheim? They're right in the city center. They have a reclamation plant like this.
The city of Anaheim proposed a similar project, and they did a pilot facility initially. This facility has every bell and whistle that has ever been conceived for wastewater reclamation. It's a beautiful system. It sits right next to City Hall. And then there's a community center for the older portion of their community, right next door on the other side. So they're wedged in between very sensitive receptors. They do things like maintain a negative air pressure throughout their building. Everything is closed and locked down. It's available to take a tour. I've been there, others have. It's a remarkable engineering wonder, and it really is designed to show you what can you do if you were to push the envelope, how far can you go? I like Dennis's response because it's kind of gradations as you move further away from the treatment plant. Upon first encountering, you don't really notice anything. You get too close, if the mitigations haven't been built into the system, you're going to smell it. That's just the honest answer. But dealing with it in a way that you reduce or eliminate as much as possible, and then mitigate, use the proper equipment and the proper approach, then it becomes very acceptable.
And there's a picture of the Anaheim facility and the similar facilities on the poster board in the back.
Yeah, I do think this is going to continue to be an issue that we just have to focus in on and get your input and maybe go out and see one or two similar facilities and see what the reaction is.
How much space will be taken up by the facility?
You know, we've made estimates based on Ovivo system that you saw on the screen, and made an allowance for architectural treatments, sort of cladding, if you will, so that it looks like an acceptable building. We're looking at less than 100 by 100, more like 100 by 70. And again, Dennis, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think those were the last set of dimensions. I'm sorry?
You are correct.
Feet, about 70 feet on one side by 100 feet. It's also possible to do different configurations. If you had your influent pumping placed so that it could function unobscured, not noticed, that might be a piece of the project that you would decide to deploy in a separate location so that you wouldn't have everything massed together. Again, that's part of the design development that needs to take place in order to get to an acceptable endpoint.
How visible will it be for the condos? How visible will it be for the condos?
That needs to be answered by the visual resource experts who can look at specific view sheds based upon sightings from different choice locations. So in order to address that, I would say we would need our visual analysts to be in the field and sited at that location at the condos looking towards the facility. So I don't have an answer yet. It has to be a part of the studies to be completed. And the other thing that you can begin to play with, although you know it costs money, but you can start lowering the facility into the ground. Maybe it's appropriate to drop it down 4 feet below grade because of the visual component. So there are ways of intentionally hiding all or portions of these facilities.
So, but the facility has not yet been sited.
That's correct.
So we're still very preliminary on that.
These are just ideas as to how are we going to address them, and that's where your input really becomes helpful. Sometimes, you know, we need to know what's important to you.
Jim, let me also just add one thing. The photograph you showed of the Ovivo plant, if that were right next door, you would not see it. It's going to be either with vegetation or with visual blockers to make something that you simply won't see that from off the site, basically.
Okay, please provide dollar amounts and who pays.
So right now we have funding approved to continue with the studies. The very preliminary estimate is in the $11 to $12 million range for the facility itself. And then there is an annual operating cost, which is right now, again, very preliminary in the $350,000 range. If you compare that to our annual water budget for the golf course, it's very comparable. And we certainly expect that East Bay Mud rates will continue to escalate over time. So it is an expensive project. It is an insurance policy. I mean, if you consider the alternative, if we don't have access to water and you lose the golf course or you need to rebuild the golf course, we have an estimate just of the cost to rebuild the golf course if it goes fallow for a year plus is in the $3 to $4 million range in efforts to reseed and replant and so forth. So it is expensive, but the alternatives are also potentially costly. But we will continue, as Jim mentioned, to refine those cost estimates as we move forward.
Why not make the golf course scruffy like St. Andrews?
I think in order to understand that question, we would probably need to go there first.
Yeah, I volunteer.
I think with or your golf course designer, you can begin to lay out a pathway that leverages this project, maintains maximum conservation, and maybe brings in a new design element or multiple elements. Where we start with is the compatibility of the produced recycled water, its quality, to the susceptibility, acceptability of the plant. So depending on your choices for turf and ornamental landscaping and how you want the golf course to play and how everybody's grown up being used to it playing in a certain way, I think those issues need to be talked through as well. Maybe it's time that you want to engage a master designer and come up with a different style. Again, our piece of it would be to make sure that the water quality is acceptable for those plants that you want to bring in. This wouldn't prohibit, it would perhaps open more doors.
How much are we paying for the watering now?
So our current budget is about $350,000, I believe, for the irrigation. Is that correct, Blake? 320. And certainly that is an estimate that we go into the season with, but the actual amount of purchase from East Bay Mud is a variable depending on how much water is available in the creek.
Will recycled water replace all the East Bay Mud water costs?
No. It'll focus on East Bay Mud water availability, but it'll be cheaper to still maintain the use of Tice Creek as well, to the extent that it can be. So leverage all the sources that we have available. Certainly not going to lose or talk about losing our potable supply for potable uses. It won't impact that.
What percentage is being paid for by the golf course?
To my knowledge, 100%, unless there are some funding opportunities at the state and local level that could assist in this type of project.
So I think the intent of that question was how much comes from people playing golf.
Oh.
And the golf course is, as we talked about earlier, a recreational amenity. People do pay for green fees, but it is also a community facility, a community amenity, and the operation is part of the coupon. Capital costs for infrastructure, such as the construction of the facility, come from our trust estate fund, which comes from the membership transfer fee that people pay when they move in. As Jim mentioned, we are looking at any other possible resources through federal or state grants, and we'll continue to monitor those options. But the main facility infrastructure would come from the trust estate fund.
Okay. Does the coupon contribute?
So the coupon pays for operating expenses. So to the degree that there are annual operating expenses, and right now the estimate is around $350,000. Again, that's very preliminary. Those operating expenses would be part of the coupon. That is fairly equivalent to what the current cost is for East Bay Mud purchase of potable water is.
Are living areas giving up green for the golf course?
Can you repeat that?
Say that again?
Are living areas giving up green for the golf course?
No, the areas that have been taken out, I mean, we have done a significant amount of work throughout Rossmore, through our landscape department to convert things like median strips from all turf to other ornamental plantings and so forth that are more drought tolerant. But we have also taken out over 20 acres of turf on the golf course to reduce the footprint on the golf course itself.
How much money has already been spent on this project? And what is the source?
I don't.
We'll have to, I don't have that off the top of my head. We've done studies, including a feasibility study and some ongoing studies. So we'll have to get back to you on that specific.
Okay. Are the water air conditioners a source of excess water used and will be replaced?
So the water-cooled air conditioning units that are on many of the manors are anticipated to be replaced. Some have already been replaced, and many more are anticipated to be replaced over the next 5+ years, and those would be determined based on each individual mutual, the schedule, but they do produce runoff that we try and capture, and that's a significant source of water that runs into Tice Creek that we are able to divert. Over time, though, as those are replaced, it will impact the volume of water we have access to in Tice Creek. So that is one of the urgencies for a project such as this, because we likely will lose that source of water.
What is the permit, is the time frame for approval of the permits?
Whatever I answer with will be wrong. Just understand that, because within each regulatory agency that we work through, there are mandatory periods of return, 30 days, based on the submittal or that your application is complete. So I can tell you a little bit about the process. A short answer on that question, close to a year perhaps. There are some permits. We talked about the Regional Water Quality Control Board. For the production of recycled water, they require confirmation that the disinfection system that's been put in place is working correctly. There's a virus study that needs to be done. That could extend after construction by as much as a year beyond the initial construction. So it's just necessary to keep in mind it's a very regulated process, a very regulated commodity. And one that just takes its natural time to move through the agencies and through the studies that are needed. I think if we looked at it from a one-year planning perspective as a major milestone and made sure that we were pressing on the relationships for quick turnaround, a year wouldn't be out of line.
How do you store the water?
The storage that's incorporated in the project design is for operational storage. So that would be replaced with potable water that's now used on the pond here at the golf course. There is no seasonal storage, no carryover storage, no groundwater injection for the use of storage of the recycled water. We did look at whether or not that would be possible. We had a hydrogeologist who's an expert in that come in. They didn't find the type of conditions within the groundwater regime that you would be amenable to the use as seasonal storage. So we're not doing any injection. There's just the daily use as occurs now for irrigation purposes off of the pond, golf course pond.
Future savings on water costs of East Bay mud?
It's a little difficult to estimate what future costs for East Bay mud. We said that they are anticipating rate hikes over the next 3 years of up to 10%. During periods of severe drought, there are surcharges that are applicable. So over a 20-year span, where the rates will eventually go is difficult to anticipate. I think we did an analysis early on that looked at about a 19-year payback period for where the rates would be equivalent to the overall cost estimate for the facility.
And some people do characterize this, and I think rightly so, that a project of this nature is an insurance policy. We know that East Bay Mud, their cost of water is only going in one direction. They're really not planning on lowering it. They've got more to do when their revenues are down, like in periods of drought. They're trying to do as much as they can for sustainability. Projects like this are and conservation, these are the only types of projects that actually create new water. So East Bay Mud recognizes that, and if you look at their board materials and their packets, they've debated and have adopted that as a philosophy. They're willing to work with partners like us in order to get projects like this approved and through their system because of the benefits they provide to everyone.
Do we have wells servicing the golf course? If not, why not?
There is one very small well. Many years ago, like 5 to 10 years ago, there was an effort to find a location that would be beneficial to adding a deep water well. There was throughout those studies, no location that was identified that would produce a quantity of significance. The small well that was added actually produces very, very, very limited. It's not even operational, the limited amount it produces. There just isn't that kind of source available.
Okay. Why not include all of Rossmore's irrigation needs?
The easy answer is that there's not enough wastewater that we can produce given the sources that are available. The project is looking at 0.25 million gallons per day to as much as 0.36 million gallons per day. If there was a higher volume available that we could do without the East Bay mud water, I think that would be the first place of cutting back, and that would show a savings. But I think we just don't have the water supply source. The diverted wastewater isn't high enough in volume to be able to completely get rid of East Bay mud water.
Under what circumstances would riparian rights be revoked or amended?
So riparian rights can be challenged by anybody. They're on file with the State Water Resources Control Board. They would have to be legally revoked if they were challenged. The state, though, can curtail certain water rights based on availability of water and the rights that are claimed to that water. The likelihood of curtailment on Tice Creek is, especially since the water generated mostly on Tice Creek, it originates on property, is pretty small, but it is still a possibility.
Has GRF investigated using reclaimed water from East Bay mud through a piping system similar to the golf courses in San Ramon? And what would the cost compared to building the plant?
Yeah, the San Ramon is the Derwa project, and they've done a phenomenal job in creating a recycled water resource. They've run out of, they've used all of the recycled that's available. There was a couple of other commitments they had made to golf courses to get recycled, and there just wasn't enough. So they've been doing a great job, not only creating the recycled water, but getting it to the point of use or reuse. Read the question.
What would that cost be compared to building a plant?
Yeah, the cost of bringing in new major pipelines from a distance to this location, they could be astronomical. We're proposing, in the proposed project is looking at a small treatment plant, 250,000 gallons per day, with points of diversion and delivery fairly close to one another. We have not done a East Bay mud solution for comparison, but it strikes me that the kind of infrastructure that would be required, the distance of the pipelines, and the existing commitments and uses of recycled water, so how much is left, I think it's a good investigation if you wanted to find out with certainty. I don't have any more than that.
That's not a project that Golden Rain Foundation could undertake in and of itself. We're not a utility. It would take cooperation from the agency and it would be something that they would initiate. Central Sand is doing some, long-term studies that we're monitoring and will continue to monitor.
Where specifically is the machinery manufactured?
From experience, I can tell you not all in the USA. I mean, and even though there is the American Iron and Steel Act, which for federally supported projects is a requirement, sometimes it's not always met. Sometimes it's just, right now with COVID going on still, it's severe delays in getting equipment. So I know that there are many cast iron pipe products, mechanical joints that are made in India and shipped here. There are a lot of technology, the process control, the SCADA and operational systems are not necessarily manufactured here. I've seen them from other countries. Dennis, do you have a sense, a major component? I know there's more membranes now being developed in the U.S. And there's
Okay. The plant will be manufactured and assembled in the U.S. The facility, the manufacturers that we would look at are all located in the U.S. We are always concerned that there will be service and availability of equipment as needed. It's a little bit like cars built in the U.S. There are components that are brought in from other countries. Some of the computer stuff may be or may not be. It just depends, but the plants will be manufactured in the U.S. with the majority of parts from U.S. sources.
And who would provide machinery breakdown insurance?
The plant will have an initial 12-month to 24-month warranty for it. The plant is going to purchase a plant. You have performance requirements and equipment specifications so that you have reputable, proven equipment built into the facility. After that, it's basically the operators, if they maintain it correctly, they should get the standard 10 to 20-year life out of major equipment at least.
And the level that you want to see in terms of locally USA manufactured components can be identified in the request for proposal when a design builder is sought. And so you could make these mandatory, if there's a choice between one out of 3 different manufacturers and you want the design builder to pick the made in America, that becomes a requirement within the procurement process so that you can tailor that to represent the community.
Okay. Implications of noise and how many employees to manage?
Noise is one of those in the 3 that hang together: noise, vibration, and odor. Noise is, to my experience, a little bit easier to control, but there are plenty of approaches in the design engineering world. Designers like Dennis who live in that world are able to provide equipment that is lower noise and then further insulate, acoustical insulation that's developed to isolate and not get the noises that you would otherwise have. Dennis, do you want to address noise at all?
There are OSHA requirements to protect the workers, but more important than that for this facility will be the noise limits established at the property line or at the boundary of the plant. And that is going to be part of the environmental studies that will then be reviewed by the general public.
And I think we've said full-time equivalents are something like anywhere between 3/4 and 1 1/4 full-time equivalent persons operating the facility.
That is correct. The plant will operate automatically, and typically once per day for a couple hours possibly, an operator comes in, checks on things, confirms that everything is functioning. If there is a upset, if something stops working, the plant automatically shuts itself down because it's unattended during the majority of the 24-hour day period. So it's kind of designed with the safety shutoffs. The good thing about these plants is that to shut them off, we stop pumping water out of the sewer, and we're not going to end up with floods or anything like that. People are sometimes concerned about a problem and the lack of operators when it's what we call the end of the pipe sewer, where the wastewater plant has to take the wastewater 24 hours a day. We don't. We have that backup of being able to simply shut the plant down and not pump any wastewater out of the sewer.
Potential sites 6 and 5 were shown. What about other sites?
Do you want to?
So through the feasibility process as well as ongoing studies, we've looked at, I believe, up to 8 sites, was it? Different locations. There's a number of variables that go into it, from visibility, access to the point of diversion, piping to the pond, return to the downstream into the sewer. So there's a number of different factors. We've looked at those sites, and those 2 right now are the most feasible based on a number of parameters.
Were the residents as stakeholders considered?
Well, that's one of the reasons we're here today. Certainly we are very preliminary in this whole process. We are continuing to look at the various sites, but throughout the process and here today, we're here to listen to you, hear your concerns, respond to those. Throughout the studies, we'll have opportunities for that very same thing. As this becomes decision points for the board, there are opportunities for input. So as we drill down further and further into this project, there will certainly be more and more opportunity for specific input from interest groups, whether it's neighborhoods or golfers or other constituents.
How many employees, technicians would be needed to hire full-time, and what would be the salary costs per year?
I think we just kind of did that one. Cost is getting a little preliminary for, we may contract this. There's a variety of ways we can go about providing staff for this. So that's a little premature right now.
What would be done with the treated water from the Swerf when the water is not needed for the golf course? Does it need to run 24/7 all year round?
2 things would happen. The diversion pump station would turn down because we don't need to pump diverted raw wastewater if there is a lower demand for the irrigation water at that time. And a strategy would be able to be developed to automate that process as much as possible. We have the ability to turn, after we turn down the diversion, we just don't accept, we let the wastewater flow by the point of diversion. So if we have overproduced recycled water and we don't have a use for it immediately, it would just go back to the sewer.
Please comment on the choice of the site being built at the end of Cactus Court.
Well, we had always thought that was a nice site. I think with any kind of project like this, it's hard to put yourself in someone else's place. I can understand, though, that there are a lot of reasons why people would have objections at Site 6. There's also benefits at Site 6 and at Site 5. I think consideration has been made, and what Jeff is saying, this is part of that consideration and the fact-finding that we're trying to do today. I don't know if I've addressed that. Can you?
So, and part of the consideration in Site 6 is its proximity to the point of diversion from the main sewer line, and being able to shorten the pipelines, its current open space, and there's not a lot of open space currently available for to build in Rossmore. It is somewhat concealed near the front there. But as Jim mentioned, there are a number of factors, and as we continue to evaluate Site 5 and Site 6, we'll disclose everything that we find and have opportunities for that community to see the renderings or see what the facility would look like, to understand what the sound, what the noise, what the smell, what any other mitigating factors may be, and provide input as we go through the process.
An integral part of CEQA is to evaluate alternatives. What efforts have been made to get piped in recycled water from Contra Costa, Central San Water District, and what is their response?
So we're working right now with the city of Walnut Creek. They're the actual lead agency, and we're doing the analysis and the writing of the environmental document. And we've been talking to them about bringing more than one alternative project to bear within the document. We were thinking this was initially going to be a mitigated negative declaration rather than a full-throated environmental impact report, EIR. That is being worked out with the city now, and those decisions will be made moving forward.
With a 15 to 20-year lifespan, will upgrades need to be done, and at what interval and at what cost?
Yeah, there's a figure in the analysis that we've done on the annual operations and maintenance requirements from a dollar perspective. I don't know if Dennis wants to speak to this, but estimates are initially made in early development of the project. You may recall when we were looking at timing, I said cost estimates should be done initially and then refreshed in an ongoing manner. Labor is one of the largest costs, single costs that the project would face. And as Jeff had said, that there are different ways of looking at paying for the operations of the facility that could be incorporated in the design build construct or contract. Dennis, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the cost?
The cost to replace equipment, or the specific item would be the membranes, would be replaced about every 6 to 8 years. Those costs have been addressed and are included in the cost estimates that were summarized earlier today at about $350,000 a year. That's not just for operation. There is the maintenance of the facility and replacement of membranes.
What is the life expectancy of the plant before it becomes obsolete and needs to be replaced? And was that factored into the annual cost?
To the extent that you nail the price down and the technology is done correctly and implemented well, those estimates of the facility no longer working or having lived its useful life, they're not very valid. I mean, you look at it, it's like the Sunday morning newspaper. There's always a section on somebody who has lovingly taken care of the car that he or she has owned for the past 30 years. And I think that construct is true as well for a facility like what we're talking about. If the maintenance is done, it's done proactively, the equipment is correctly selected, the design engineer is correctly selected. There isn't a useful life that has a 20 or a 50-year end. Facilities like that can go on indefinitely, as long as they're taken care of incrementally.
So I just wanted to do a quick check-in. We're a little over an hour in. Is everybody doing okay? We're kind of checking through the questions. Okay.
Okay, smoke from fires north of Rossmore can be trapped in our valley for days. What will be the smell of the water facility be like in on a daily basis?
Raw wastewater facilities are often described in the industry as having a musky or earth-like smell to them. If smells are noticeable at high concentrations and are off-putting, there's a reason why. And that has something to do with the way it's being operated or the way it's not being actively managed and operated. This is a wastewater, well, we start off with the water supply, McCullamy River water through East Bay Mud, excellent source, excellent supply. I think you go through membrane, the membrane bioreactor is a level of treatment that pretty much is unsurpassed. I can't predict, it's a residential community, the wastewater parameters, the chemical constituents of the wastewater should be even throughout the year, pretty standard. We don't expect wide swings in quantity of any of the components of the wastewater. So we expect a lot of similarity on a day-to-day basis, and then the ability of the team to provide corrective measures if something is just off, if it's not functioning correctly. Dennis, I may have not given that enough detail. Is there more that you'd want to add?
In terms of the specific question, it appears that if smoke is released into the air, it can stay in the area. I think that was the question. We're going to prevent that by not releasing those odors from the plant to begin with, so that even if you have an inversion and you're not blowing the air out of the area, we don't want those odors ever to be released to where they could be trapped by an inversion. Mm-hmm. It's just like saying if we don't have a fire, if we don't have a source of smoke, we're not going to have smoke build up in the valve. That's my spin on that question, Jim.
Thank you.
Since the Cactus Court location is not flat, but a hilly site near homes, why was it chosen as a possible location for the plant? Also, is it not close to the golf course? It is not close to the golf course.
So
let me say that the lack of a level site can be an advantage in that we flow from tank to tank based on different elevations. So the levelness and the site evaluation has not been completed yet, but a slope site is not a necessarily disadvantage. In terms of distance to the golf course, the advantage of Site 6 is that we only have one line of produced reclaimed water. The reclaimed water is the only water that has to go in the long distance pipeline down to the golf course lake. The raw wastewater and the return waste material, those are short lines, very easy to maintain at Site 6 relative to Site 5.
So the point of diversion in the sewer line would occur just north of the gatehouse. So it is in close proximity to Site 6. So you're able to divert up to the treatment plant, return waste, and you're only pumping water, the reclaimed water, then to the irrigation pond.
What consideration has been given to capturing and storing excess winter runoff instead of a SWRF?
I think we talked about that a little in terms of not having seasonal storage available groundwater. If there was another location where a large pond or lake could be built, that has not been envisioned to date. But if, once you get into the winter season, you generally have a lower irrigation demand unless we're moved continually by climate change.
What would be the total acreage required for the proposed project?
Dennis, you've looked at, at the sizing. We've said 70 by 100 feet, but in terms of buffer area, I don't know that there's a size that we've committed to yet. Maybe we'll just leave that for future investigation. Excuse me. Yeah, we don't have a figure that says X number of acres in order to convey egress and entrance and worker parking. Those elements have to be brought into the preliminary design. So I don't have a shorthand answer for how many acres it's going to occupy. The goal, though, is to keep it as small as possible and then to shrink it further. So,
If reclaimed water is pumped into the pond, what are the potential impacts to wildlife?
there are none. It's safe and effective for unrestricted use. So I don't believe from a health department perspective or even from a state environmental agency perspective that there's, Dennis, are you aware of anything direct
No.
to wildlife?
It's
No.
actually being used in wetland restoration projects.
And we had 2 instances where we were hired to convert and plan and convert the use of recycled water at the county animal hospitals. So it's being used for wash down there. And it's, again, the term safe and effective for those uses.
Are you going to have public hearings for the community surrounding Rossmore, St. Anne's, the shopping center, et cetera?
I'm sorry, there's a piece of that I missed.
Are you going to have public hearings for the community surrounding Rossmore?
Yeah, well, do you want to speak to that from a CEQA perspective, that there would ultimately be a hearing in order to approve the document?
There will be a public comment period during the CEQA process. Well, everybody would have an opportunity to comment, and there would be hearings at the City of Walnut Creek for the adoption of the CEQA document and the approval of the project.
The lead agency could also elect to have 1 or more meetings similar to this to get more input from the community.
So this project requires discretionary permits from the City of Walnut Creek, making the city the lead agency under the California Environmental Quality Act. So that's what we're referring to with the studies and the CEQA document. How many membrane units? Is the electric for power going to be solar?
Solar goes to you. Dennis, do you have a configuration on cartridges or units on the
Well,
membrane?
when you say how many membrane units, the first division is it will have the ability to operate, it'd be 2 trains, 2 process. So we'll have 2 halves of the system. Half the membranes will be in one and half the membranes will be in the other. In terms of membranes, that depends, the specific number of membranes, that is going to probably be on the order of 20 to 40 membrane cartridges per train. That depends specifically upon the particular manufacturer and the design of the membrane elements.
Thank you.
In regards to the solar question, we are not that far into the design process yet to know if solar, based on the site selected, is even an option, but that's certainly something, a component that we would look at.
And as we said earlier, the water is going to be stored in the pond. And did we discuss how noisy?
Well, then an evaluation of the noise potential and then mitigations would be done.
And solid waste removal, how many truckloads per day and the smell of the trucks?
So basically, the inorganic material that comes off of the screens would be bagged automatically, goes into an automated bagging system, much like filling up a very large trash bag in the house. That would then be sealed up, and about twice a week, the normal landfill delivery truck would come by and take that material away. What was the second part? Would it smell? No, because again, we would avoid smells from the configuration. the way the bagger is connected into the system, there would be an odor control unit right there at the bagging process. So those solids, the inorganics, they get hauled off to the county landfill.
And you said how many?
Well,
How much truck traffic?
usually at this stage of a preliminary design, we're thinking that you get 2 truck trips per week. Is that about right from your recollection, Dennis? I mean,
That's going to be the maximum amount, possibly during the summertime, because this plant operates at different flow rates to meet the seasonal demand. And during the winter time, you might do 1 truck every month. Probably 1 truck a week would be maximum during the summertime when the plant's operating full capacity.
and the volume of the material that gets collected at the headworks of the treatment plant is reflective of the community. Hillsides here, if there's lots of runoff that's occurring, there wouldn't be because you manage that. If you were on the beach, in a beach community where there was lots of sand, that material ultimately finds its way into the sewer, and that's where it's then extracted. So just kind of a key, as you're driving around, you can see the materials. Eventually that gets into the storm drain and the sewer. That's what's reflective of what would come off of the system from the inorganic materials, the filtered water.
Okay, we've talked about noise and smell. Are there any other possibility of hazards?
Well, I don't know that noise and smell are hazards. They're
No, we've
things
talked
that-
about those as
Yeah,
topics, but
okay.
are there hazards in addition?
Well, maybe you want to speak to that from a CEQA perspective, but yes, there are, but they're all design solutions are developed to implement and make them so that they're benign, that they're not hazardous. I mean, there are certain chemicals on site that need to be locked up and stored. There's the citric acid, which is very mild acid, but that's used often in facilities like this for cleaning the membranes. Other hazards, I mean, OSHA, as Dennis mentioned before, OSHA establishes requirements for railings and trip and fall areas have to be eliminated. The use of ladders and sampling equipment has to be designed correctly. But I'm not sure that I'm hitting the nail on the head with
I
the
think
issue
you
of-
are. I think you
of
are.
hazard.
I think those are the main hazards, is spills, chemicals. There'll be berms. There'll be lots of precautions in place to eliminate any true hazards from happening from having those types of chemicals on site.
Yeah, we won't have any off-site discharges. There won't be any on-site flow through stormwater flowing through the system.
When will some of the alternatives be eliminated?
I think we're significantly early in that process in evaluating both Site 5 and Site 6, so likely won't eliminate one of those options for quite some time.
So the city of Walnut Creek will determine what level of CEQA will be done. There's some questions here about whether it would be a negative declaration and there will be mitigation measures. So if they determine that there will be significant impacts that couldn't be avoided, they would declare an environmental impact report to be done, which is a very thorough document which would have to flesh out all the alternatives and talk about areas of controversy and a lot of sections that a negative declaration would not handle or a mitigated negative declaration. Typically, these types of projects have been mitigated negative declarations. There have been no, in the past, impacts that were determined could not be mitigated. But it's up to the city of Walnut Creek to make that decision. We have all these. We've gone through all these. Let's see. The traffic related to Cactus Court, there would actually be an access road that would go directly to the site off of Rossmore Parkway.
Yeah, we actually would not be accessing anything through Cactus Court. We have, it looks like about 15 more questions or so. I appreciate that people have kind of hung in there. We're certainly happy to stay and answer those questions, but if you do need to leave and you want to leave those questions with us and we're not able to get to that, again, make sure you leave your email address and we'll try and get back to you. But we'll try and go through these last few questions and then wrap it up. Thank you for your attention today and your time. You can always get in touch with us and send any additional questions that you didn't think of today or as things come up throughout the studies. Yes, sir. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dwight Walker, President of the GRF Board. I just want to thank you all for coming today. I want to reiterate what Jeff said. We're early on in this process, even though about $600,000 has been spent out of the trust fund so far. That's just to get us to a point where we know how to answer a lot of the questions that were posed today. But the big decisions are down the road. $11 million, operating costs, what it does to the coupon, all those sorts of things are coming down the road. And we need your feedback. So as Jeff said, please pose your questions. There are a number of months, maybe years, involved in getting this resolved. So appreciate you being here today, and please send your questions, and we'll keep addressing them. Thank you.
Okay. Could Rossmore buy 2 large tanker trucks and drive them back and forth to Martinez?
We actually costed that out. So the answer in the short, Martinez, you can fill up, but you can only fill up so much volume. And in order to fill up the pond, Blake, how often do we turn over that pond? It's a lot of trips. Even if we hired somebody full-time or 2 people full-time with trucks going continuously, we wouldn't be able to keep up. But we did look at that.
I would think there'd be a significant environmental analysis under greenhouse.
Just the impact on the roads coming in with that
If you're
weight.
proposing that much traffic, yeah, it needs to be analyzed.
If we had 250,000 gallons a day, which is the proposed capacity initially, if you can get a truck that'll hold 10,000 gallons, which is a big truck, you're talking 25 trips a day. That's a lot of traffic, a lot of cost.
Okay, the 2020 report recommended 1 site by the existing golf facility. Who rejected this and added the Cactus Court for future consideration?
I think there's been 6 sites or even more under consideration and part of the study as we've kind of narrowed in and done reports to the board. We've looked at some in greater detail. The Cactus Court, the end of, the entry to the community there has benefits, as we mentioned, based on the proximity to the point of diversion, length of pipe to the pond. We have not rejected Site 5 yet. That is still part of the analysis. So Site 6 and Site 5 are still viable. Other sites we have analyzed based on a number of factors that just didn't make them as viable as those 2 alternatives.
Okay, one more cost. Clarify the 14 million would be acquired or loaned, and would we pay it back over 20 years?
How ultimately this will be funded is still a debate that needs to take place. funding for capital projects typically comes from the Trust Estate Fund, but ultimately the board would have to consider the timing, the funding mechanism, whether there was loans involved. We are still looking at any opportunities for grant funding. GRF is limited in what it can qualify for any kind of grants, but we are always looking for that opportunity. So yet to be determined still, but that is a question for the GRF board ultimately.
What other communities like Rossmore in California have put in a SWRF?
I keep this paper with me because it comes up often. There's about 15 in different stages of planning and approval, some under construction, some constructed and operating. Maybe the closest one is in the city of Pacific Grove, which is right on the coast. If you've been to the Monterey Bay area, you may be familiar with their golf course. So there are, it is not uncommon, but it is, again, because of the technological developments and better membranes that are available, smaller footprints. I think that's what's driving some of these projects. Other reasons is, it can be very tailored to the specific needs of the community that's seeking to have the irrigation water supply. So this is within California. There probably is the same amount within Nevada, Arizona, even Oregon we've seen at the Banded Dunes Golf Course, I believe. So that's a partial answer, but there are a lot of opportunities for conversion, and these communities are taking that project on. Bainbridge Island is last.
So the gardens in Site 6, what would happen to them?
Again, we're doing some survey work. I don't think we have exactly located the treatment plant of where it would be in proximity to the gardens that are there at Site 6, so still to be determined.
And I have to correct myself, looking at the table, this one is not filtered for California only, so it does include other states.
Do homeowners on Cactus Court have to disclose the SWRF and any other idea about the potential impact on property values for the next few years?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we'd have to get back to you on that answer. I wouldn't think so, but.
And originally, Breezac was the consultant. Who is Bowman, and what are their qualifications?
So Breezac and Associates was acquired by Bowman. Bowman has been around since about 1976, I believe. They're a company of 1,100 individuals in 33 locations, mostly centered in the eastern seaboard. They're experts at roadway, right-of-way, water resources is one of their strong suits. They acquired us through normal procedures, so we are now working as Bowman.
This is still Jim Breezac.
And I think that's it. I tried to condense some of the variations. If you felt like your question wasn't answered, it wasn't intentional. I thought it was through the various variations on the themes. Thank you.
So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your attention today. There is some information boards around the room. We will certainly stay around if you have any other questions, or you can always contact us as well. Thank you.